Great. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Lynn Walsh. I'm the Assistant Director at Trusting News. Today we are going to be talking about how you as a freelancer can earn trust. Some of this is going to be similar to strategies that we talk to newsrooms about, but a lot of this is going to be kind of broken down specifically for how you, as an individual journalist, can earn trust. And so I introduced myself, Lynn Walsh, the Assistant Director of Trusting News. I also am a former uh, National President for SPJ and former Ethics Chair. I'm currently back on the Ethics Committee. I'm based in San Diego, California, half the year, and upstate New York, half the year, currently in upstate New York. Molly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi all. My name is Molly Muchna. I am currently the project manager with Trusting News, so get to work with Lynn. But my background is working in a lot of legacy newsrooms. So I've worked in daily news for about a decade, doing everything from breaking news reporting to public safety reporting to entertainment to social media. So kind of did all of the roles in the newsroom. And we're also joined today by Stacey Overton Johnson from the SPJ freelance community. At kind of the end of our training today, Stacey's going to be sharing some resources and ways that you can plug into the SPJ freelance community and the support they offer. But Stacey, do you want to unmute and just introduce yourself briefly?
Stacey, did we lose you? Are you still there?
Sorry about that. The whole mute button had me
No,
wrapped up.
no problem. It has to happen
I'm
once,
the
right?
I'm the chair of the freelance community. I've been the chair for a couple of years, was the vice chair for 5 years before that. I have been a freelancer since 2005. I'm in my 25th year of journalism, and freelancing for 20-ish. There was like a 4-year stint where I went back to full time. I've worked in major cities: Houston, London, New York, Miami, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Orlando. I've lived in all of those cities and worked in all of those cities. I am now in New York. I am in upstate New York. I'm actually not far from Lynn Walsh, which is bizarre. But I grew up here and I came back during the pandemic to kind of be closer to family. I've done broadcast and print journalism. I'm also a digital editor. I work on a TV show in Texas that airs around the southern United States as a freelancer. We just started season 11. I'm writing a script this week. And I'm a digital editor for that TV show's website. I'm also an English teacher at a vocational or a technical high school in upstate New York too. So I have two completely different. I'm actually in my English office right now doing this meeting. So that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stacey. I'm so glad that you're here and that we are partnering with SPJ and the freelance community, because actually I also am a freelancer, although it doesn't look like freelance reporting as much anymore. But I am currently still a contractor, and a lot of this that we're talking about, I have used throughout my career, and I'm very grateful to the SPJ freelance community for helping guide me, including Stacey and others. So the big question here is low trust in news really your problem? You don't work at a news org, right? Like you're a freelancer, you're your own person. You have your own brand. You can show people your own values. Well, unfortunately, it is your problem, because when people think about news, when they are asked, do you trust news? Do you trust news organizations? Do you trust journalism, journalists? When they are thinking about the answer to that question, and if they trust news, journalism, journalists, anyone who is working in the field is being lumped into that question and that idea of it. So this does apply to us. It applies to all of us. And so we need to make sure that, one, we are aware of that. And we also need to say that, hey, there are things we can do and we should do if we want people to trust us. And I think even more so as freelancers, your brand and your ability to be trusted goes beyond just the public and also deals with editors and the newsrooms that you may work with. And so some things that we've heard from freelance journalists about related to trust and problems that they may face are this: it's difficult sometimes to establish credibility without the backing of a newsroom. This might particularly come into play with sources. which Molly's going to cover and talk about some tips for that. It also can be hard to gather feedback. One thing that we talk about at Trusting News, we talk a lot about transparency as a way to build trust. Engagement and listening is another big way to build trust. That can be particularly difficult as a freelancer when you aren't able to send out a big survey from a newsroom to your whole community, right? That's harder to do on an individual level. Well, we have some ideas about that because that listening and that engagement is still important in the freelance if you are freelancing. And then just this frustration of being mixed in with the rest of the media. So that question that we saw, is low trust in news really your problem? We heard people see that they're seeing the impact of that. And so when we talk about where does trust in news stand, right? Trusting news, we think a lot about and look at research that's been done on low trust in news. Why do people distrust news? Why do people distrust journalists? So we have tons of research on this topic, but very briefly, some highlights from that are that we know that when people, first and foremost, trust in news is low, pretty much definitely in the US, but also almost consistently around the world now. There are a few places where trust in news is a little bit higher when you look internationally. When we look at who trusts news, there are differences depending on how old they are and their political affiliation. So we know that people who identify as Republicans or conservatives tend to trust in news less than liberals and independents. We also know that younger people tend to trust news less than older people. If you take one thing away from this webinar about why people distrust news, please think about this. We know at Trusting News often that distrust in news is because people do not understand how journalism operates. When they don't understand why we do something, why we choose to cover a story, why we choose a particular source to talk to, how we fact check, the fact that we have ethics, people will say, what? Journalists have ethics? No way. Yes, we do. And we think about them often, but people do not know that. So what happens? They make an assumption. Often that assumption is going to be negative. Basically, they do not give us the benefit of the doubt. And when we think about that, what that ends up turning into is this huge disconnect between what we think we offer as journalists and how we are perceived. I'm sure a lot of you, especially if you are members of SPJ and active in the freelance community, you do this because you believe it is a public service. You believe in the power of accurate information. You work hard to be ethical, to fact check. We are doing this because people have a right to information, but people do not see it that way. Oftentimes they see journalists as part of the elite, part of the problem. We talk to politicians all the time. You know, we're friends with them. We go to these galas, maybe. We show up in these places. Our bylines are out there. We may show up on TV. A couple other points that we'll talk about as well is most people have never spoken to a journalist. So if you think about who you trust on a basic level, they're probably people you know, or at least have had some sort of interaction with. Well, why do we as journalists, if we are not talking to our whole community or not really getting out there to be seen as much as we should, then just assume that they will trust us? That's not really how trust works. I think it has, and we've been lucky to be able to benefit from that for years, but that's not really how trust works. And so how can we, and there's a lot that freelancers can do to kind of put themselves out there and make themselves more available to get to know their community. And related to that, journalists often don't reflect the community that they serve. So the diversity, the lack of diversity that we see in newsrooms, which may be why some of you might be freelancing actually and could be a value that you provide to the community because of the diversity on many levels you may have that makes the reporting better, more richer, more useful to the community and the people that you're serving. So a couple other points of research, and again, we're not going to stay in the problem. I'm going to spend just a couple more minutes on that, and then Molly is going to talk about the solution that we have and things that we know that work. People don't think that journalists have their best interest in mind. This is research that basically showed when they were asked questions, certain statements. One of those statements, for example, in general, most local news organizations have the resources and opportunity to report the news accurately and fairly to the public. That was the statement people were given, and they were told to say, do you agree with that, or disagree with it? And a majority of people did say they agree with that. But when you look at some other things, people do not necessarily think that news organizations have the best interest of their readers or viewers or listeners in mind. They also do not necessarily think that most local news organizations are trying not to mislead, misinform, or persuade the public. So they think the opposite, that that is what news organizations are trying to do. Another kind of important point, which I think if you're a freelancer, like this is a good data point for you. More and more Americans are getting news from friends, family, and online forums, not just news outlets. I don't know necessarily why this is. This is something at Trusting News that we want to dig into more. Like, how does someone pick who is that trusted source for them? Because it's not necessarily a TV station, a radio station, a local news organization anymore. So how are they choosing who those people are? Those are questions we don't know. But the reality is they are shifting that way more. Maybe you as a freelancer could be that trusted source that they turn to, and it's not necessarily that news organization. And then another thing just about kind of some data points to keep in mind. A lot of news, when people think about news and when they're asked about how does it make you feel, it often is something that it makes them feel bad. They actually sometimes are avoiding it because it's making them feel worse emotionally. And so as we think about the problems here, again, there's this big disconnect between what we think that we offer, our value, that public service that you think you're offering, and what the public thinks that we are offering and how the public perceives news. And so I'm going to pause it there as the problem. And now I'm going to throw it to Molly to talk about some solutions and some things that we know work to build trust. And we're going to dive into those a little deeper as we go on.
Thanks, Lynn. That is exactly a great starting point. This is where our work at Trusting News comes in. We really help try to bridge that divide, between that perception gap that Lynn was talking about between what the audience and the public perceives of journalists and what we're actually trying to do. And so we are continually trying to help journalists ask this question of like, okay, I'm an ethical, mission-driven journalist. What is it that I should be doing? So some of the basic principles that really ground our work is that we can't persuade everyone to trust us. We know that that's just not a reasonable goal. Not everyone is going to be fans of our work or believe in the stories that we're reporting, and that's okay. But there is a large swath of the community that we could be doing a better job serving and reaching with our journalism. We also know, like Lynn was just saying, that being a news consumer is really confusing and overwhelming. Many people have a casual relationship with the news. More and more people are tuning out from the news, avoiding the news, turning to other sources for news. So that's just a helpful perspective to keep in mind and kind of a good point of humility to keep in mind as we're reporting as journalists. Also acknowledging there are problems on both sides of our broken relationship with the audience, right? It's not just what we're doing as journalists that's causing distrust, right? There's major distrust in all sorts of institutions right now, like government and science. And so there's lots of factors at play here, but no one's trying to solve the problem for journalists, right? Like no one else except for us are going to come in with the solutions and try to make this better. And so it's really on us as journalists to do a better job to be working to earn that trust back with our audience. Again, we also know that not all journalism is good. That was something that we heard from freelancers who we have gathered feedback from over the last few months, that frustration of being kind of lumped in with the media as a whole. That's super valid. It is really frustrating because, some media out there is not that good. It's not media or journalism that you would stand behind. And so instead of trying to defend the whole media organization as a whole, right, like the entire information ecosystem, what our job is to really differentiate how our work is different, how our work is credible and accurate and fair. We also know that we don't get credit for the decisions, ethics, or values that are invisible to our audience. As Lynn said again, there's this disconnect between what the public thinks and what journalists are trying to do. And so, even if you're trying to be a really ethical, fair journalist, you're not necessarily getting automatic credit from the audience. That's why it's so important to be proactive about telling the story about how you're working to do that. And we'll talk a lot about that in today's training. We also know, and Lynn touched on this too, that trust takes both the head and the heart. So both cognitive and emotional trust. So it's, again, not just enough to think that somebody is trustworthy. Like as journalists, we're really good at the cognitive trust, I think, of showing the facts and showing all of the reasons why we should be trusted. But the emotional trust can be a little bit trickier, right? It's like, do I feel like you're working on the side of the community? Do I feel like you care about people like me and my story? So the ways that we do this work are through transparency and clarity. Transparency is kind of a foundational piece to all of our work. Transparency about the reporting process, what kind of content you choose to cover, where the content comes from, what your values are. It also, as Lynn said, takes a lot of engagement with your audience and being responsive to them. We do a lot with helping journalists articulate that counter narrative. So again, how can you tell a better story about the work that you're doing? And then how can you take advantage of where you have it, right? Like how can we insert this sort of transparency and trust elements into the coverage that you're already doing when you're already reaching people, when you already have their attention? So why, just real quick, why is transparency so foundational to our work? It's because we know it works. At Trusting News, a lot of our strategies are based in research. And so this is kind of just one research study that we've done that highlights kind of the overall positive impact that transparency and reporting can have. We did this project with the Center for Media Engagement a couple of years ago, where we had basically people look at two different versions of a story, one that was just a regular news story, and then one that had this added transparency element, or what we call sometimes an explain your process box that talked about, why and how you're covering the story, your approach to covering the story. And what we found was that the people who saw the story with the box overall felt like that news organization was more trustworthy. It boosted their perception of the news organization. They felt like it was more transparent and accurate, reliable, credible, unbiased, all of the things that we want our coverage to convey. So this is what we'll be talking about today in today's training, is giving a lot of tips and strategies and showing newsroom examples, or I'm sorry, not newsroom examples, a lot of examples from individual journalists of how they're getting on the record about this, how they're establishing their credibility, talking about their mission, their credentials, their ethics, their approach to their work, again, how we can invest in building trust with sources, and then some examples of how you can add that transparency element and how you can get transparent with your audience.
Okay, so first and foremost, we want to establish credibility as journalists. And so I just put a couple links in the chat there that I'm going to talk through. I'm going to share some examples, but those links will kind of help you do what we are talking about right now. So the idea here is you want to make sure, how am I able to show, one, potential sources that, yes, you should talk to me, and here is why, right? I've done this before. I can be trusted because I have this particular ethics involved. I keep this in mind, all of those things, right? These are important things to establish to get people to talk to you, but also think about it. If you're reading an article about something, maybe it's AI, you are maybe curious, well, why, what's their experience covering this topic? They've done it before, right? The New York Times has done, if you ever listen to the Daily, sometimes in the Daily, they have these sort of ads that will pop up in between the sections that will describe how their reporters, the different experience that they have. And I know one of the first times I heard that, I was like, wow, I actually trust that reporter so much more now because I know this about their background. I know that this much experience they have had, not only in journalism, but sometimes outside of journalism in the field that they're covering. So to establish that credibility, first and foremost, start with a strong bio. Try to, with any publications you're working with, make sure and ask, can you get a bio added to a page somewhere? If they won't add it to a staff page because you are not staff, make sure when someone clicks on your byline, can there be something that is more there than just a list of the stories that you have done, right? If they're not able to do that or add that somewhere, can it be something that they at least put at the bottom of the page, maybe, of your stories? If that's not possible, then of course, what do you have on your own website? What do you have on your social media pages? What do you have on LinkedIn, right? Anywhere where this should be publicly available, where someone will Google you. Sources are going to do this, and the public may as well. They're going to be maybe curious about who this person is. So when you think about a bio, you want to discuss to get the credibility. What kind of journalism experience have you had? Focus on any kind of expertise, maybe awards you have won, publications you have worked for. The other thing, though, is try to include some personal details. The reality is, as we are thinking about how people choose what to trust, who to trust, where to go to for information that they believe, they do, especially nowadays, want more of this personal connection. So are you willing to share a little bit about yourself that can show that, hey, this is a real person. This isn't just an AI bot sitting up in a office somewhere in the middle of a downtown in a city, which we have heard people perceive journalists. They're just typing away at their computer. You're real. You have things that you like. You have things that you're doing on a regular basis. If you are working somewhere and it is safe to share a photo and share contact information, please do that as well. So this is an example. And here, one thing that I like about that, and when we talk about personal details, that does not mean you have to start sharing photos of your family or other things that are super personal like that. It could be something as simple as here, Eric says, has since fallen in love with his adopted city, even if the city hasn't yet fallen in love with him. Also talks about that he likes to find the best pizza place and traveling around the area for whitewater kayaking, right? Doesn't have to be super, super personal, but it's something that adds to kind of the character and personality. Another example, this is from a television reporter in Texas. Thinking about also maybe some of the photos that you're sharing. And again, you don't have to overshare and have every element of your life, but can you have a little fun on your website maybe, or in kind of a staff bio or on social media profiles that shows a little bit more of the personality. Obviously, you want the credibility, pictures of you reporting if possible, but also maybe something that's not as serious if you like doing something outdoors. He also has things here about like where he went to school and goals of what he wants to do after why he got into news, but then also what he wants to continue to do and the fact that he can't live without pizza. So it's that good mix. The bio can be those basic things, right? Then we talk about something called a reporter mission statement. This is something that goes beyond the bio, and that link that I put in there, and I'll put it in here again, it's a trust kit that can help you write a reporter mission statement. The goal here is that you're writing something that's going to show that you have values, ethics, and goals. It is helping you the community know why should they contact you, what stories exactly are you trying to tell. People do not walk around thinking about story ideas. They do walk around and see problems. They do walk around and see things they want fixed, but maybe do they think, hey, I'm going to contact this news organization? Some people do. We love those people. Most people do not. So how can we kind of invite them and tell them, hey, contact me because I want to do more stories that do X. My goal is to try to help the community have the best water quality, the best healthcare system. So tell me what problems you're seeing so I can try to find solutions. The other thing that a reporter mission statement does a really good job of is it can really help keep your coverage consistent and tied to your goals and hold you accountable by getting on the record about what they are. The other thing about this is it is written in a way that is for the public. So you're telling them, here's what I do, here are the types of stories I cover, here's what I'm trying to achieve, here's why to get in touch with me. This is something that can go great at the bottom of a page. So maybe if the publications you are working for will not let you have a bio, say, hey, can I give you 3 sentences that talk about who I am and how people can get in touch with me at the bottom of the story? That might be something to negotiate. When we look at what a good mission statement includes, it should include these 3 things: that why, the reason you do what you do, the what, the actual thing you do. So don't talk in jargon. If you talk about why, the reason you do what you do, give an example of what that looks like with a link to a story. And then the way you conduct your work. So what are some things you can promise people about the work that you do? Is it that you will always fact check? I know that sounds basic. People do not assume that we are doing it, that you are trying to minimize harm by thinking about privacy when people reach out to you, which makes me go to the next thing of get on the record about your ethics. Most publications that you work for and will pitch to probably have their own ethics code or their own ethics guideline that is linked to on their website or hopefully published in live. That is great. But you're not always working for the same publication, right? So how do you hold yourself accountable, and what do you do to try to make sure that you are ethical and achieving a certain standard that you have, right? This is going to build credibility, help you get sources, and help people trust you and your content. So we have seen some freelancers on their personal websites actually put up a personal ethics code. So you could go through the motion of actually writing something that does go in depth of like what your values are, right? But you don't have to do that. You also could just link to, and we'll show you an example of this, to SPJ's code of ethics and say, this is what guides me. Maybe it's RTDNA's code of ethics, right? This is something that guides me. So getting it a personal code of ethics, whether it's something you write, whether it's just a couple bullets and you link to a couple codes, anything. But the goal is, I do have ethics, I have standards, and here's how I abide by them. Another idea, if you're working in video or audio, record yourself talking about this. This is a great example, and I'm going to put a link here in the chat to this. It's a great example from a content creator named Becca in the video. She talks about how she determines what to take as free and what not to take as free. There's a lot of different things about sponsorships, sponsored trips, sponsored gear that gets sent, and the decision of, do I disclose this? The answer is yes. And also what I love about this video when you watch it is that it is just so refreshing to watch, because there's this mention of the fact that she doesn't have it all figured out. She's still working to get it figured out, right? And I think that is so great, because sometimes as journalists, we say, no, we know everything, we have all the answers. Well, the answer is no, we actually don't. We're figuring this out. It could change, right? But here's what I'm doing now. And I'd love feedback on this. What do you think about how I decide to take free gear and then test it out or write a review? What do you think about how I approach conflicts of interest or sponsor trips? So a really good video, and doesn't have to be kind of formally produced. This video does look really good, but honestly, you could just take your phone and do selfie style video of like, hey, I want to just talk to you about what I do to fact check and my commitment to that. Another example is you could answer some of these questions on your website. It's a simple FAQ. Sabrina Halverson does this, and I love that there's a question, what is your mission? And she answers that about the mission is to provide listeners and readers with unbiased information that will impact their lives and livelihoods. I love that there's a question here about how do you define misinformation and what are you going to do, or what are you doing about it? And then the two other questions that are answered, what are your journalistic ethics? So this is an example here where instead of totally writing your own personal ethics code, which you can do, there's just a mention of, hey, I believe in RTDNA's code. Here it is. This is what guides me. It could be as simple as that. I also love that there's an explanation about what does it mean to be a watchdog for the people. So oftentimes in journalism, we think of different elements of journalism, like for a watchdog, accountability. What does that mean? How do you choose which stories to cover? One question that I think would be that I'd love to see more news organizations answer, but I think particularly freelancers, is how do you choose which stories to cover? Like, are there certain topics that you really are focusing in on? And are there some things that you just never will cover, right? And there might be good reason for it, and that's okay. But kind of getting on the record about that, I think, is important. So the question is, where can you put this information? Definitely, if you have a personal website, which I'm sure many of you do, or any kind of account that you control, this information should go there. A mission statement could also go on a business card or a link to your ethics policy on a business card. Um, Also, like I talked about, could you link it from your bio or from a tagline or your byline in a story? So instead of maybe going to a list of stories you have done, hey, can I actually link my byline to my website or to my code of ethics, my bio on my personal page, maybe? And then, of course, your social media pages. Those are places where you control and you can share all this information um, anytime that you want and have it live there. And so now Molly's going to cover how to build trust with sources.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so another, as we talked about at the top of this, that we heard from freelancers that a struggle was really building trust with sources, right? Like, how do you get sources to talk to you? Kind of some frustrations around sources not understanding the timeliness of stories or kind of how that reporting process works. Feeling like it was hard to get a call back always when you didn't have the backing of a newsroom. So a few things that before we kind of jump into some suggestions to how to make that process go maybe a little bit easier and hopefully establish some rapport and trust with sources, is first to just acknowledge that it's pretty valid that people might be skeptical of being a source, especially in this current climate, right? People are wary, they're nervous of how their name will appear online. And a lot of that is because, most people have never even spoken with a journalist before. This Pew research from a couple of years ago shows that only 21% of people have ever talked to a journalist, and that number goes down the less rich, old, white, and educated someone is. So it really paints a picture of who as journalists we tend to talk to, who might feel more comfortable being a source, and who might feel a little bit more uncomfortable, or maybe this is a new process for them. It's really valid, again, that people are skeptical. Some people have been really harmed by journalists in the past. They know people who have been harmed. Maybe their family had a story that negatively impacted them, a family member, a community member. And so as journalists, it's really up to us to point to, how can we share that we want to do right by their story? How can we make the process feel less risky? And how can we point to our credibility in that? So part of it, again, is recognizing your role. We talked earlier about differentiating yourself from the overall media. But to just somebody on the street who you've never met before, who's never been a source before, right? Like, they just view the media as a monolith, and they, again, might have negative experiences, positive experiences. They're coming at it with all different perspectives that might be different than what you're trying to achieve, right? And so just kind of having some humility that we're showing up as part of the media. People who staff the media don't always reflect the country, right? And so in that, we can only control what we control. So just come to these interactions with empathy and acknowledging that, it's okay that people might be skeptical and weary of being sources. Also be ready for questions, right? I think for as journalists, we can often take for granted things about the interview process, right? We do this so often. I'm sure so many of you have done hundreds and hundreds of interviews, and it's easy to just kind of get on autopilot and start jumping and asking questions. But again, most people have never spoken to a journalist, so it's valid that they might have some really basic questions about how the interview process works. Like, how do you even decide what stories you're covering? Is everything that they say going to show up in the story? Like, why is it that their whole name has to be attached? Is it going to be fact checked? So some basic questions like this. So we definitely suggest that you leave time to answer these questions, but we also suggest that you proactively explain your story, the approach to your work, and your process. And I'll explain a bit about each of these next. So explaining your story. Really, I think, again, journalists sometimes can hop into interviews kind of in the middle of the story, right? Like, they're like, okay, I'm like on this, I've been reporting, I'm getting all this information, I'm contacting you, I need to ask you these questions. And as someone who has been interviewed before by journalists, I can tell you that sometimes it's really confusing. Like, sometimes people will be like, okay, I need to interview about these topics. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand what the bigger picture is. Like, what's the story that you're reporting? What kind of information are you looking for? Who else are you talking to? Because if I had some of that information, right, I could show up better prepared. I could much easier participate in the interview and give the information that would be helpful, and just feel like a little less skeptical of what the process is, right? I can say from personal experience, it does feel really vulnerable being a source, right? Like you don't know how people might use your words or skew your words or what kind of quotes they might pull. So again, kind of just trying to help people understand the bigger picture of what you're doing when you enter this process. Also then explaining your approach, like how are you being careful to report this story? Like Lynn was saying, can you point to a reporter bio or a mission statement or an ethics statement that shows, kind of the standards of your practice? Can you share links with the other reporting that you've done on this topic? How can you talk to them or share examples of how you work to be accurate and fair? And then again, explaining that process. I think it can seem so basic, but it's something that as journalists, we often skip over, and we know that it's something that the public doesn't understand about journalism or journalists. Like they don't understand how the process works. So the more that we can explain it to them, the more at ease sources tend to feel, so can you get really clear about, where will the interview take place? Are you going to record audio? Will there be visuals? How long should they expect to talk with you? You go again, like how much of what they say will end up in the final story? Can you anticipate what kind of reaction the story might bring? And then I think with being a freelance journalist, it's really important to also get at the what happens next. And if you can get honest about how much control you have over the publication process, like, do you know if they'll be cut from the story? Do you know when your final piece will publish? It's okay if you don't. I know for some freelance journalists that we talk to, they don't have that control. They don't have that option. That's okay, but can you get honest about that and say, once I hand this off, I'm not sure what the publication timeline is, but I will keep you in the loop as best as I can. When can they expect to hear from you next? So I love this example from Audie Cornish, who used to be at NPR. I believe she's at CNN right now. But she has kind of this, what she called a Miranda rights around doing interviews with people and with sources. And so shares this before every single interview that she does, where she says, we're going to talk for this long. It will be edited down to a third or a fourth of that. So getting really clear about that off the bat. I don't want it to be edited in a way you feel uncomfortable. So the shorter you can keep your answers, the better. And then also just giving them the space to say, if you start answering something and you're not liking where it's going, that's okay. You can stop and restart again. Again, for so many people, they haven't ever talked to a journalist before, talking about everyday people, right? Not like politicians or government sources. Many just community members have never talked to a journalist before. So how can you make the process feel less scary? How can you make it feel okay that they can say something wrong and maybe say, oh, that wasn't actually what I was just trying to say, can I start over? So one more thing to leave you with before we kind of jump to our next topic is, what if you started your interviews with the question, what are you afraid I might get wrong? We suggest this to journalists all the time because I think it gets at a couple of things that are really helpful. One, it helps you really understand people's perceptions of the news, right? So you kind of start off the interview by understanding where they're coming at, a little bit maybe about their background or interactions with journalists or news in the past. It also acknowledges that journalists sometimes get things wrong. We can't defend the whole media. We can't fix all the problems in the media, but just acknowledging that as journalists, we're not perfect. We've messed up. As an industry, we're for sure not perfect. So acknowledging that can go a really long way in just building trust and rapport with sources. And then it also helps demonstrate our credibility. It shows that, you're working to do things differently by allowing space to talk about this, by having the humility to ask the question. So the last kind of big strategy topic we'll talk about before jumping into some resources is how you can get transparent about the reporting process. Again, we shared at the beginning that we know transparency is foundational for us. We know it's really the key to building trust with our communities. But for a lot of journalists that we've worked with over the years, I think Lynn could probably attest to this too, it can sometimes be really challenging to know both what you should be getting transparent about and how to get transparent about that. Like, what does that actually look like in your coverage and in your stories? So one way to kind of start this process of thinking about transparency are thinking about some common questions or complaints that you maybe have gotten on your stories or that you see about the media in general. So A big one is like, why did you set out to even do this story? You know, a lot of people think we're reporting stories to back up a political agenda or a bias that we have. So how can you get on the record about why it is that you're even covering this story? You know, how did you pick sources? Where did you find your information? How did you take extra care with certain elements? If there's something that you were really careful, if you were working with the victim or maybe someone who wasn't an adult, like how did you take care in that reporting process? How did you try to work to be fair and accurate? Like what are the steps you took? Is the story fact checked? And then how long did it take you to report the story? Just some basic things, right? So you don't have to do this, all of this list on every single stories. There might be other transparency elements not on here, but it's kind of just a good starting point to think of some of these, what we consider like basic journalistic processes, and explaining them in that daily coverage. So I'll show a few examples of what that looks like and how individual reporters have shared that kind of in their own personal stories or on their own social media. So this is a reporter, Emily Davies, who works for the Washington Post, and she has a reporting Instagram account that I think is really great because she often posts kind of these behind the scenes looks at her stories and her coverage. So this one in particular was from about a year or so ago, and it was about reporting she did like a big investigative and feature story about like a young teen in DC who was kind of in the middle of a lot of gun violence. A lot of his friends had died as a young teenager from gun violence, and was kind of telling his story and how you know, he's navigating all of that. And so she posted this Instagram post with lots of photos from kind of behind the scenes of the reporting process that included kind of the back and forth red pen editing of like how the story was fact checked. She also, you know, shared like it took 6 months to report this story, a trip to Orlando, countless days around DC, and also acknowledging it required an enormous amount of trust and vulnerability. So again, just kind of giving people a look at what that process looks like, both in just like the investment from her, the investment from the source, and just some, you know, basics of how that process worked. Here's another example of kind of that showing behind the scenes work from reporter Erin in South Dakota. She covered a really devastating tornado a couple of years ago in her community. And she kind of just, what I loved is through this Twitter thread, just step by step took you through kind of what her night looked like, which started out, you know, as watching a West Wing episode with her boyfriend, like on the couch, but then like how it escalated and what it looked like and where she went to go find sources and which government officials she reached out to for information and how long she worked for, and just kind of, again, showing what that process is like step by step. This is another example from a reporter at Science News. This was actually a box that was attached to the story itself. So I know that for some of you, you might not have ability to attach these to the story, the final story that publishes on a news publication site. That's okay. You can still take this information. And again, like Lynn was saying, you can share it in your social or on your website or different areas where you might promote your newsletter, your content, maybe it's a newsletter. This is a great example. This was a story she was doing about a new cat food that supposedly was supposed to help people who are allergic to cats, like no longer be allergic. But the research was sponsored by the company that had a financial stake who was selling the cat food, right? And so pretty much every journalist, I think, would say like, huh, that's kind of suspicious. I should probably talk to outside experts and sources on this topic to get a second opinion. That's probably pretty typical of the journalistic process. But what I love that this reporter did is that instead of just taking that for granted that people would understand that, she got clear and transparent about it, saying like, who did we speak to and why did we speak to them? Why did we try to ping experts that weren't part of the research study and add their voices into the story? Just one last example for you guys of kind of what this can look like on social media. Again, this is a reporter, Jennifer Peebles, who works at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as a data reporter. And again, kind of just shared her process for what it looks like trying to get public records. She talks about what the public record laws are, what kind of agencies she reached out to, and kind of the importance, again, of having that data. So again, it's something that's pretty common for us as journalists is to use public records. But of course, it's something that the public doesn't know or understand that process unless we're getting clear and telling them about it. So I'm just going to share a few resources before handing it off to Stacy to share more about the resources and support that the SBJ freelance community has. But we just recently published, thanks to support from the SPJ Foundation, we recently published a Freelance Trust Kit, and our Trust Kits are step-by-step guides for journalists. So it really walks you through a lot of the strategies that we talked about today, plus more, including like how to engage with your community to get news story ideas. It has a section of advice from newsroom editors who we often work with, who work with freelancers, and kind of things that they said that freelancers could do or pitch that would help make the case for this trust work when they're writing content for a publication. So you can find all of that at trustingnews.org/freelance. And I'm sure Lynn will stick a link in the chat as well. I want to say a huge thanks to this list of journalists. Again, like I said, both a lot of the stuff that we talked about in terms of feedback from freelancers in this webinar and the feedback that we include in our Freelance Trust Kit came from actual freelance journalists across the country over the course of many months. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to all of the journalists. I don't know if any of them are here today, but really thankful for their help and insights. We couldn't do this work without journalists who are willing to both share feedback about their experience and then take the strategies and apply them to their own work. And just making note, why we have that Freelance Trust Kit, we also have lots of other trust kits as well. So Lynn already shared one about how to write a reporter mission statement, but we also have one about how to ask for meaningful feedback, one specifically about how to get on the record about your ethics, one about adding transparency into your coverage. So you can find all of those and access them for free at trustingnews.org/trustkits. And then also just want to share that if this was interesting to you and this building trust is something that you care about as a journalist, we have a newsletter that we share every single Tuesday called Trust Tips. And it's just one actionable tip for earning trust. And we, again, send it out once a week and try to highlight newsroom examples of how journalists are doing this in their work as often as we can. So you can subscribe at trustingnews.org/newsletter. And again, I'm sure that Lynn will put a link in the chat as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Stacy to unmute and possibly share a screen and share more about the SPJ freelance community.
Yeah, thanks. This has been wonderful. Lynn and Molly, I'm pretty sure have agreed officially to do this session in person in Washington, D.C. at the SPJ convention. If they have not agreed officially to do it yet, I'm going to bribe them with cookies or something to get them there because this is so valuable. I really appreciate this. I do wish I've been a journalist for 25 years. And if for all of you younger journalists listening right now, this is one of the most valuable things, I think, this session for your career. I wished I'd had this 25 years ago, even 20 years ago. This is really valuable to be able to build trust with, and you think about it's with politicians or with businesses. I did a lot of medical reporting, so building trust with PR people in the hospitals, but really it's with the people. It's with the people you're interviewing, the people that you just see on the street. How do we get those people to trust us? And that is something I wish I'd learned a lot sooner. So I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about the freelance community. We are part of the Society of Professional Journalists. We've got about 500 members. We are the largest. Maybe Chicago's bigger. Chicago has a chapter that might be bigger than us, but we are the largest sort of entity within SPJ. If you are an SPJ member, Society of Professional Journalists member, there is no extra dues, there's no charge, there's no fee to be part of the freelance community. You do have to be an SPJ member to join the freelance community. Current SPJ membership is $78.75 a year, $39.50 for students and postgrads. The freelance community we do lots of events. We've actually been a little bit quiet this year. We just had some issues this year, but we've been a little bit quieter than normal. But we put on webinars every year, several webinars a year, just like the one you're sitting in right now. We just some recent ones we did AI for journalists. How do journalists use AI? Taxes, how do freelancers do taxes? How to write across mediums as a freelancer. I actually do that one because I've written for digital, print, and broadcast. So there's lots of different sort of educational opportunities each month. It's about every other month. This year we're behind on that, but Every year at the convention, we produce a few sessions for specifically geared towards freelancers. In the past, that has been maybe 3 to 4 sessions at the conference will be for freelancers that we produce. This year's a little different. We have been given our own freelance track. We're doing a freelance track of sessions. So if you've never been to a convention and you are a freelancer, this is the one to go to. If you're waiting and holding out, this is the one, because we have the opportunity to, we are going to put on somewhere between 10 and 15 sessions that will be specifically geared towards freelancers. They will not overlap. So they will be in a room, a single room will be for the freelance sessions. And we've already got 5 confirmed with speakers confirmed. And we still have a few more months to plan. So we'd love to see you there in DC. I'm going to quickly share my screen so that you can see. Let me pull this up. Hopefully you all can see this. So this is the Society of Professional Journalists homepage. I believe we're in the process of updating this. I don't have any control at all over the homepage. This isn't my design. But it's very hard to find the freelance community. This is the homepage. If you go all the way down here, all the way down, we
A bag
are
of
at
skinny
the,
puff only has 100 calories for the whole bag.
wait, hold on. Where did I find it? Let me see. Where, see, I can't even find it. And I'm literally the chair. Okay.
We did share a direct link in the chat, Stacy. So I think
How
folks
come I
have.
can't find it right now though? I just had it up. I went back to the oh, it's down. Oh my gosh, it's even further. Look at how far we are. Here we are, right here. See this? Isn't that anyway? Okay. So here we are, freelancing. We have our own page though, but we just need it to be more visible. I actually am working right now with somebody at headquarters to make it more visible. He's open to that. And he said, yep, we absolutely can do that. So I'm just going to show you, you can see where the officers, this is this current, you might recognize some of the names. I'm the chair, Ginny McCabe, who's the president of the Cincinnati chapter. Maybe she's the region's director too. Ruth Tyler Carter, Nicole DeCriscio-Val. A lot of these people have been involved for quite a while. And you may know them. We've got some younger people here too. So we've got a good wide sort of spread of people as far as, oh shoot. Sorry. As far as ages, so we've got lots of different people on the board with different levels of experience. This is the biggest thing. Well, let me quickly just tell you the SPJ Foundation Freelance Fund that we are giving away grants, mini grants. The deadline for this session or this round of grants was yesterday. But we give grants up to $500. It's kind of a new program, so we're still rolling it out, but we've already given a few grants. We're going to be giving 2 or 3 more next week to the people who applied or send in an application. So that's something to keep an eye on. You got to be part of SPJ to do that. This right here is what I think is one of the most valuable things we do. Freelance opportunities, the freelance and for freelance pitching sources. Freelance opportunities, I'm going to show you what we do here. If you go to this site, you will see all of these. These are all, you can see it's all the most recent, the earliest deadlines from May 1st forward. These are all contests, fellowships, competitions, prizes, grants, any of that sort of thing that people can get money to report on. So you can search it by any of these fields. You can search by eligibility, notes, title, and you could just enter anything. Like if I want to say, okay, I'm looking for all the grants, that brings me to the grants, that anything that has a grant in the title. So, and that's just for this month. That's just for May. These are the upcoming grants. So you can peruse this, go through this. We are in the process. We hope of actually making this only available to SPJ members. Right now, it is not only available to SPJ members. So if you are not a member, you can actually go on right now and check this out. But that might go away soon. This is my favorite thing, the freelance pitching resources. This is, I feel like, the most valuable thing for any freelancer in the world. And I'm not exaggerating that. These are the pitching guidelines for, we've got more than 500 media outlets in here. It's all alphabetical. We give the pitching guidelines. We give the direct link to the pitch guide, the writer's guidelines, how to submit something. They all have different ways of saying it. We list the subjects or types of articles. We've got notes that we add. We've got their website. We've got the geography. If you are an SPJ member and a member of the freelance community, we also give you a direct contact. That is something you do not get unless you are part of the SPJ organization and a freelance community, but you do get all this other stuff. Again, I'm not sure that's going to stick around, but let me get this out of here. And this, again, you can just do this. So if you filter, you can add a condition. I don't want to look at media outlet. I just want subjects. Okay. I'm a food writer. Well, one of the things I do is a food writer. So I'm going to look up food. There's all the places that take stories about food. If I write about fashion, here's all the fashion. I mean, not all, there might be others that do it, but this is just kind of a quick, okay, here's 9 different outlets that will take fashion pitches. We try to update this as frequently as possible. We actually are struggling right now to find someone who can put the time into updating this, but we will put out updates on calls for pitches, current conditions, current pitches, if they are accepting pitches. We try to update that. It's actually been Hazel Becker who's been doing this, but this is a monumental task, and we're trying to get somebody else on board to help out with this. If any of you want to get involved, please email me and you can do this with us. But anyway, this is, I think, is just the greatest resource we have. There's lots of other resources. We're going to run out of time, so I'm not going to go too much further into that. I feel like that's enough to entice you to be part of our world. And I hope I see you at convention.